Hello. Good evening, hyvää iltaa kaikille, keitä täällä on paikalla heti kättelyssä hirveellä ihmisiä taas. Hellurei. Aishan Goat söi osan Korania. Sas. Ja keitäs täällä on paikalla? Keijo iski tosta ennen kuin edes päästiin. Lopetetaan toi äänestys, kun se on tässä chatin edessä. Ärsyttävä. Baaritelissä oli eka, ylläri, hyvää iltaa. Ja Keijo heitti ennen kuin striimi edes alkoi, niin 5 lahjajäsenyyttä. Eli jos oot paikalla, niin en tiedä, mutta Tiina Mattila, Joonatan Arska, Topi 2.0, se on parempi versio normitopista. Ja sitten Helena saivat lahjajäsenyyden Keijolta. Kiitos Keijo. Kiitos tosi paljon. Hyvää iltaa Sami Goat. Siellä taisi Kameli voittaa Goatista riippumatta. Mä nyt otin sen pois. Eli 12 ihmistä äänesti. Jengi on vielä kameleita. Nyt Anteria saa massia, kun on jälkitoistossa mainoksia ja hyvin muista ilmoittaa verottajalle. Moro. Ei ole jälkitoistoissa, mulla on about 10% videoissa mainokset. Mä voin näyttää sen tilasto, jos haluat siihen. Aina joku syy keksitään 3 tunnin striimistä on joku 2 sekunnin pätkä, missä on kuulemma liikaa väkivaltaa. Ja sitten ei anneta mahdollisuutta edes leikata sitä osiota pois. Ja sitten isketään koko videolle rajoitukset, mutta ei valiteta siitä enempää. ADS on paikalla, hyvää iltaa. No niin, mennään mun puolesta ihan suoraan asiaan. Tänään ei ole mitään artikkelia, en ole hirveästi mitään tehnyt. Olen tehnyt koodihommia viimeisen päivän, tehnyt ihan omia juttuja, niin ei ole tässä artikkelia, mutta on pari hauskaa videota, mitä mä olisin halunnut teille ehkä tänään näyttää. Katsotaanpas. Mun puolesta voitaisiin aloittaa ihan videon aiheella, eli Ottomaanit tulevat. En ole vielä katsonut itse tätä videota, mä säästin tämän säästin että voidaan katsoa tämä yhdessä. Meidän on pitänyt katsoa tämä pari striimiä, nämä Ottomaanivideot. Olette pyytänyt näitä Ottomaanivideoita, niin katsotaanpas. Miten Unkari pysäytti turkkilaiset sulttaanit.
For over 2 decades since coming to power, Sultan Mehmed II waged wars across the frontiers of his empire. From the flat fields of Hungary to the mountainous terrain of eastern Anatolia, his armies marched from campaign to campaign, carrying the banners of Islam and the House of Osman wherever they marched. However, the Sultan's ambitions lay elsewhere, in lands where Muslim armies hadn't ventured in hundreds of years, Italy, the heart of the Catholic world. Before these ambitions could be realized, Mehmed II began to conclude the many wars that had occupied him over the last decade. In today's episode of our series on the Ottomans, we will discuss the fall of Theodoro, Mehmed's vassalization of the Crimean Khanate, the definitive end of the prolonged and bloody Albanian and Venetian wars, and the Battle of Bredfield. Do you know why thousands of people on YouTube and Patreon support us financially? Because they get history you won't find anywhere else. We release 3 new exclusive videos every week. Plus, they get perks like early access to all videos, voting rights on upcoming series and videos, access to our private Discord, our production schedule, and much more. Right now, 250 exclusive episodes are waiting for members and patrons, including from our series on the Eastern Front of World War II, Spanish War of Succession, the Punic Wars, the Pacific War, the Iberian Reconquista, the Russian Revolution and Civil War, the North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, Sicilian Wars between the Greeks and Carthaginians, and many others. By joining, you're not only unlocking rare content, you're also supporting the stories you love. Your help allows us to keep producing 3 free videos per week while paying our team competitive salaries and growing the channel. Join via the links in the description, the pinned comment, or by pressing the join button under the video. Thanks for making this possible.
I can take it off.
In the twilight years of his reign, Mehmed II began focusing on consolidating his power in the outer regions of his empire. After years of fighting on multiple fronts within his realm, the Sultan sought to stabilize his frontiers, while formulating new plans to expand westward toward the heart of Europe. The first region we will examine is the Black Sea, which the Sultan aimed to transform into an Ottoman lake. Nonetheless, many powers perched on the Black Sea coast would challenge these ambitions, including the principalities of Moldavia and Theodora, along with the Genoese colonies of Kaffa, Kerch and Tana, and the Crimean Khanate. To fully understand the political situation, we must first turn back the clock. The Golden Horde was one of the major successor states of the Mongol Empire, emerging in the mid-13th century under the leadership of Batu Khan, a grandson of the Great Genghis. Under the leadership of Batu Khan has dominated an expansive territory that stretched from the Carpathian Mountains and the Danube River in the west to the edges of Siberia in the east. Feared by various foes, the Golden Horde famously raided Eastern Europe for centuries, often extracting tribute to support its war machine, particularly from the minor Russian principalities to its north. In addition to being a significant military power, the Khanate played a prominent role in the Eurasian trade network. Situated at a crossroads between east and west, the state facilitated commerce along the Silk Road by providing protection to caravans and maintaining a stable system of weights and coinage. Cities like Sarai became bustling trade hubs, where goods from China, the Middle East, India and Western Europe exchanged hands. This
Näytätkö nämä muuret tässä olisi mennyt? Minä synnyin kaupungissani Itä-Turkissa on tällaiset hyvin muinaiset muurit. Nyt siellä tällaiset muuriset. Hyvin tämmöiset, ne on vähän restauroitu, mutta ne on roomalaista ja myöhemmin jotenkin muslimien rakentamia. Näitä on paljon ympäri ämpäri. Miksi tää video alkoi alusta? Kun pitkään mä hittiin tätä katsomaan. Se mainosti sitä noin passionoin.
Hands. This prosperity contributed to the cosmopolitan nature of the nomadic Khanate, attracting merchants, scholars, and artisans from diverse cultural backgrounds. By the early 14th century, the Golden Horde had abandoned its ancestral religion of Tengriism in favor of Islam under its ruler Uzbek.
Tengriismi on just Turkissa edelleenkin. Niin kuin mä oon pari päivää sitten sanonut, niin sana Jumalalle harvemmin on Allah. No okei, nykyään käytetään ehkä enemmän Allah, mutta turkin kielellä sana Jumala, millä ei periaatteessa ehkä aina tarkoiteta Allahia, vaan yleissana Jumalille ja Jumalalle on ollut Tanre, eli Tengri. Ja se on jo nimenomaan ollut Tengriismistä lähtöisin ja sitten siitä kielestä tulee mongolikielistä turkkilainen kieli.
Khan, linking the state to the broader Islamic world. However, following Uzbek's death, the state experienced dynastic instability and a rise in independence movements among its local governors and generals. With the authority of the Ulugh Khan compromised, the Golden Horde faced a series of significant military defeats against its northern neighbours by the second half of the century. Although the military and diplomatic situation somewhat stabilized during the reign of Toktamish Khan in the 1380s, Timur's invasion of the Khanate in the 1390s shattered any real chance for the state's recovery. Fragmenting like the Mongol Empire, the Golden Horde, now referred to as the Great Horde, was reduced to just the core lands surrounding its central capital of Sarai, also known as the Ulugh Yurd. In the early 1440s, one of Toktamish's grandsons had.
Miksi turkkilaiset pitää suomalaisia jotenkin sukulaisena? No harva pitää, no nämä niin sanotut turaanit, niin sanotut turaanit, tällainen ihme. Katsotaanpa mitä turaanit on tästä. Vanhentuneen teorian mukaan Eurooppaa ennen indo-eurooppalaisia asuttaneita ihmisiä, jotka olivat vähän niin kuin eri rotua kuin indo-eurooppalaiset, vähän niin kuin minä olen indo-eurooppalainen. Teorian mukaan sekä suomalais-ugrilaiset, turkkilaiset että mongolilaiset kansat polveutuivat turaaneista. For the horde, mutta on hyvin vanhentunut käsite, tällä ei ole hirveästi geneettistä eikä mitään historiallista pohjaa. Nyt voi olla joku hyvin kaukainen esi-isä, mutta joo, jos mennään tarpeeksi kauas, niin Genghis Khan on jokaisen meidän esi-isä. Tämän takia jotkut turkkilaiset on olemassa nationalistituranista ja Suomessa esimerkiksi sinimustat levittää nimenomaan tätä paskaa. Niin kuin mä sanoin, eräissä nationalistisissa ideologeissa turaneja pidettiin usein alkeellisina esi-ihmisinä ja kehittyneempien indoeurooppalaisten niin kutsuttujen arjalaisten tekemä Euroopan valloitus oli sitten oikeutettu. Kato. Jos sä välttämättä haluat olla rodullisesti alempiarvoinen kuin minä ja usko, että turanismi, niin anna mennä. Mä oon Indo-Eurooppa. Mä oon arjalainen. Näin näitä hölmöjä juttuja.
Haji I Giray established a newly independent Tatar-led state in the fertile peninsula of Crimea and claimed the contested title of Ulugh Khan. Tracing their lineage.
Tämä on vähän tällaista natsiteoriaa kanssa, en mä tiedä, mielestäni tyhmä perustaa jotain uusia kansallisia identiteettejä, perustaa johonkin höpö turanismin ideologioihin ja sitten fiilailla jotain Ali Ahmedia jossain Turkissa, koska sä oot kuulemma sukula kamaan näin.
Back to Batu Khan and the great Genghis Khan himself, the Giray family aimed to reclaim the entirety of the former territories of the Golden Horde. In this quest for legitimacy, they confronted the Great Horde, and later the Khanate of Kazan further north. During the ensuing wars, the Giray family allied with the Grand Duke of Muscovy, while the Joji family partnered with Lithuania. Yet this balance between the two sides shifted with Mehmed II's conquest of Constantinople in 1453, which expanded his realm's influence over the Black Sea. Aligning himself with the growing power of the Sublime Porte, Haji I supported its military campaigns against the Genoese over the next 2 decades. With the death of Haji in 1466, a civil war erupted in the Crimean Khanate between the two sons of the former ruler, Nördevlet and Mienli. In their struggle for the throne, the elder Nör allied himself with Muscovy and the Great Horde, while the younger Mienli sought military assistance from the Tatar elites of the Crimean Peninsula and the Ottomans. After 2 years of conflict, Mienli had secured the throne, while his defeated brother was imprisoned in the Genoese fortress of Sudak. Although the Khanate appeared united once more, it faced another wave of instability in 1475. For many years, local Tatar governors, known as Tuduns, had been granted authority to govern the Muslim population of Kaffa and its surrounding lands by the Crimean Khan and the local Genoese consul of the city. However, after a dispute over filling the vacant office between the Khan and the Genoese, the Tatar elites of the Crimean Peninsula sought Ottoman intervention to resolve the issue. Among these elites was the influential Eminek of the Shirin clan, who by the beginning of the year had driven Menglei from his capital of Kirkye, forcing the Khan to flee to the safety of the Genoese at Kaffa. Seeing an opportunity to expand his influence across the broader Black Sea region and restore order in Crimea, Mehmed II eagerly accepted the invitation and ordered Gedik Ahmed Pasha to set sail for the region in the spring of 1475. The Ottoman Grand Vizier led a large navy to Kaffa and besieged the Genoese settlement. Kaffa could only resist the invaders for 4 days, as the intense Ottoman bombardment proved too much for its defenders to withstand. With the Genoese consul executed and Mienli captured, Ahmed Pasha turned his attention to the remaining fortresses that were still resisting in the region. Like Kaffa, the fortress of Sudak fell to Turkish forces after a brief siege, which also led to the capture of Nördevlet. The fall of these settlements was followed by the annexation of Kerch and Tana later in the year, thus ending the Genoese presence in the Black Sea. The notable fortress of Theodoro, located in the interior countryside under local Greek rule, was also besieged to eradicate the last vestiges of Christian power in Crimea. The Principality of Theodoro, also known as Gothia, was a small Christian state that traced its origins to the Empire of Trebizond, making it the last remnant of Eastern Roman civilization. Economically, Theodoro was deeply involved in regional trade. Although it lacked a significant port of its own, it maintained overland routes connecting to Genoese-controlled ports, such as Kaffa and Sadak. These trade connections helped Theodoro remain economically viable, despite its political vulnerability. Influenced by Greek, Gothic, and local Crimean cultures, the Gabras family governed from their capital at Theodoro and maintained autonomy through close diplomatic relations with their more powerful neighbours. With Ottoman armies now at his gates, Prince Alexander Gabras prepared his capital for a brutal siege. Theodoro was ideally suited for defence, as it sat atop a steep limestone plateau, more than 1,000 feet above the surrounding plains, and was fortified with massive stone walls, towers, and natural cliffs that made a direct assault exceedingly difficult. It had successfully resisted attacks from the Tartars and Genoese in the past, and the defenders likely believed they could withstand another onslaught. However, Ahmed Pasha brought artillery and siege engineers with him, many of whom had been present in Constantinople during the 1453 siege. Even with this development, as well as limited supplies and foreign support, Alexander was able to hold out longer than even Constantine XI himself. For over 3 months, Turkish guns bombarded the capital, but were unable to penetrate the limestone plateau. Despite their courage and determination, the exhausted defenders of Theodoro were vastly outnumbered, and morale dwindled as food and water supplies ran low. By December 1475, the Ottomans had captured the city, either by breaching its defences or through a false retreat and ambush. Theodoro fell, and with it, the last vestige of Eastern Rome. With Christian power in Crimea coming to an end, Mehmed reinstated Nördevlet, but within a year of his return, his realm was invaded by the Great Horde. Although the invasion was repelled, the Crimean elites wrote to Sultan Mehmed requesting his deposition and the reinstatement of Mienli to the Crimean throne. By 1478, Mienli was released from captivity and regained the throne, but this time as an official vassal of the Sublime Porte. With Nördevlet fleeing to Muscovy, the Crimean Khanate was once again united under a single Khan, who now ruled as the Ottoman Sultan's appointee. In a single military campaign, Mehmed's northern border was secured from enemies, as Moldavia was also compelled to make peace with Constantinople by becoming a tributary to the House of Osman in 1480. Consolidating his power to the north, Mehmed II turned his attention to the wars with Venice and Albania to the west. Consequently, Turkish raiders once again penetrated deep into Europe. In 1476, the Venetian territory of Istria was set ablaze, and its population was taken into slavery. The following year, Omar Bey's raiders advanced into Venetian-held Friuli, where they defeated a local force near the Isonzo River and captured dozens of its officers. In the aftermath of the battle, the lands between the Piave and Isonzo rivers were pillaged and burned, with flames visible from the top of St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. Muslim forces possibly have never ventured so deep into the lands of Christendom, which sparked panic all across Europe. In 1478, another raid into the wider region was carried out, this time by Mihalolu Ali Bey and Malkacholu Bali Bey. The two Ottoman marcher lords continued the successes of the previous year by sacking the towns of Baveg, Tolmino, Barid, Ficine and Valais. While his marcher lords were active deep inside Europe, Mehmed II began preparing for yet another military campaign, this time targeting Albania and its Venetian-held towns. The primary objective was the town of Shkodra, which had been besieged in 1474, along with the Albanian capital of Kruja. By 1478, the once formidable armies of the League of Leisure had dissolved due to a lack of unity under Albanian leadership. Additionally, Kruja had also been virtually surrendered to the Doge. Already blockaded for over a year by local Ottoman forces, the starving garrison of the fortress capitulated when the Sultan's 30,000-strong army appeared beneath its walls during the summer. With the anticlimactic surrender of the capital of Kruja came the conclusion of the formal Albanian revolt, which had initially ignited almost a quarter of a century earlier in the very streets where Mehmed now paraded his army. The bleeding ulcer that had drained the armies of the Sublime Porte had finally been vanquished. With Islamic banners now flying over Kruja, Mehmed's forces marched towards Shkodra, which was already under siege by Rumelian Beylerbey David Pasha. However, unlike the former Albanian capital, the Venetian stronghold proved to be a greater challenge for the Sultan. For many months, the defenders held out against a barrage of artillery fire. Reinforcements from Anatolia were also unable to alter the course of the bloody and prolonged siege. As winter approached, Mehmed and his main forces retreated, while Evrenisolu Ahmed Bey remained with a token force of 10,000. Exhausted after years of war with the Sublime Porte and with Shkodra on the brink of surrender, Venice was determined to end the disastrous conflict at any cost. At the end of 1478, Giovanni Dario, the secretary of the Doge's Senate, was granted unlimited powers to negotiate peace with Mehmed and accept all the demands of the Grand Turk. The terms outlined in the Treaty of Constantinople would prove disastrous for Venice. The Doge was to cede Shkodra, the island of Lemnos, and the mountainous region of Minor to the Porte. Moreover, Venice was to relinquish all claims to Kruja and Negroponte. All territories acquired by Venice during 16 years of warfare were to be returned, while Mehmed, in turn, was to restore all towns and territories he had occupied in the Morea, Albania, and Dalmatia. Lastly, Venice was to pay a grand installment of 150,000 golden ducats over the subsequent two wars, with an additional 10,000 ducats as the new annual tribute for securing trading rights within Ottoman territory. With Venice securing an expensive peace for itself, the last remnants of resistance in the Balkans against the Ottomans were left to their own devices. The remote lands of the Despotate of Epirus, under the rule of Leonardo III Tocco, had been slowly stripped away by the armies of the Sublime Porte. In 1449, the capital of Arta fell, followed by Anglo-Castron in 1460 to Turkish raiders. The Ottoman-Venetian War of the next 2 decades had been an opportunity for Leonardo to regain these lost lands, and so he decided to align himself with the Doge. Nevertheless, with the end of the war, Epirus now lay open to an easy conquest, as Mehmed wished to use its domains for his future plans against Western Europe. In 1479, Gedik Ahmed Pasha invaded the Despotate at the head of a large fleet and captured its capital of Vonitsa, along with the islands of Lefkada, Cephalonia, and Zakynthos. As a result of the sudden Turkish invasion, Leonardo and his officials fled to Taranto, thus officially putting an end to the Despotate. With all of Albania now under his direct control and peace with Venice secured, Mehmed II began preparations for a new offensive aimed at Western Europe. Nonetheless, before he could proceed, the Sultan had to confront one last front against a foe he had yet to defeat, the Kingdom of Hungary. By the summer of 1479, Ottoman raiders had resumed their attacks and pillaging of King
Voisi
Matthias
olla
Corvinus's
korkea, sama kuin
lands.
saa Katarin
In
rahat.
swift and brutal assaults, the towns of Nedelischja and Lüteme were set ablaze, along with the fields and villages along the Drava River. Despite the devastation, these incursions were merely the beginning of a significant Ottoman offensive into the region, as in the town of Smederevo, a grand Turkish force was being assembled. With a total strength of approximately 15 to 25,000 men, the army, led by Mihalolu Ali Bey, crossed the Danube from Vidin, where they were joined by 2,000 allied Wallachians led by Basarab IV. The Wallachian voivode had usurped his cousin, Basarab III, 2 years
Dracula oli Valakiasta.
prior, with the help of Stefan of Moldavia, but had since then knelt to Ottoman vassalage.
Valakia, toisin kuin luullaan, niin Dracula se oli jonkin verran myös Ottomaanien puolella ja sitten vastaan ja sitten puolella ja sitten vastaan ja sitten puolella.
After the two armies merged, Ali Bey set his sights on the lands of Transylvania, with the objective of seizing the rich deposits of gold, silver and salt in the local region. However, the main Ottoman objective of the campaign was to consolidate their influence south of the Carpathians, thereby preventing Hungarian intervention in Wallachian politics, as had been done after the Battle of Valea Alba 3 years prior. By the fall of 1479, the Ottoman army was on the move. As they plundered their way to the town of Oreshti, Ali's men filled their wagons with abundant spoils and captives. However, as he was preparing to start his return march to Wallachia, the Ottoman marcher lord heard news of an incoming enemy host, and so prepared to make a stand at the town of Shibut. By October 13th, Voivode Stefan Batory of Transylvania, leading a host of 25 to 30,000, composed of Hungarians, Romanians, Transylvanians and Serbs, arrived at the gates of the Turkish camp, situated on the plain of Breadfield near Shibut. Seeing the foe across the plain,
sen takia Dracula oli niin vihattu, kun sehän oli vähän niin kuin maapetturi, että se myi itteensä muslimeille, se teki muslimien työtä, se sai sultaan nyt paljon rahaa.
Ali Bey marched out with the army and began preparing for battle. The Battle of Breadfield had just begun. The Ottoman army was predominantly composed of light Akinjer cavalry, accompanied by their Wallachian allies, led by Basarab IV in the rear. The center was commanded by Hasanolu Isa Bey, the left by Makacholu Bali Bey, and the right by the leader of the entire army, Mihalolu Ali Bey. On the Hungarian side, Voivode Batory commanded from the center of his army, which consisted of his retinue of 8,000 Transylvanian infantry and cavalry, as well as a small contingent of Wallachians, led by the deposed and revenge-seeking Basarab III. On the left flank were stationed 10,000 Hungarians, led by Paul Kanizsi, who was accompanied by Seke light infantry in the rearguard. On the right flank were stationed the Transylvanian Saxon troops, led by Georg Hecht, comprising 4,300 infantry and 700 light cavalry.
Sitä mä oon näissä keskiaikaisissa taisteluissa aina miettinyt, miten ne aina erotti toisensa, kun pitkälti kaikki näytti vähän samalta. Että oliko niillä oikeasti vaan sit eri väriset jotkut paidat, että ne sopii, että okei, me ollaan punaisia, te olette vihreät, vai mitä? Koska voisi kuvitella, että ne on vahingossa listinyt ihan hemmetisti jotain omiakin, kun sä oot vaan siellä heivumasta, sit sä oot vaan, sorry, en mä tiedä, minkä maahan ne saa.
Accompanying them were 900 light Serb cavalry, led by despot Vuk Grigorovic and Dimitar Jakšić. After a series of inspiring speeches from the leaders of both armies, the battle began when Hecht charged into the Ottoman left. However, after much bloody melee and taking heavy casualties, the Saxons and their Serbian and Romanian allies were forced to retreat, as Bali Bey's horse riders proved too great a challenge to overcome. Meanwhile,
sen mä niinku ymmärrän, että jos on ihan täysin erinäköiset tyypit, jotka pukeutuu täysin eri tavalla, esimerkiksi jotkut roomalaiset hyökkää johonkin eurooppalaiseen barbaarikylään aikoinaan, niin joo, sä tiedät kuka on roomalainen ja sä tiedät kuka on joku saksalainen partaveikko metsästä, mutta niinku, ei se nämä joukot tässä, että miten ne niinku osas pitkälti erottaa toisensa, se mua aina vähän mietityttää.
While another bloody melee between Batory and the Ottoman center of Isa Bey took place, but during the heavy fighting, the voivode's horse was killed under him, thus severely wounding his thigh. With their commander taken out of action and the Turks breaching their lines, it seemed like all was lost. Despite the circumstances, Báthory returned to the battlefield, an action later celebrated by European chroniclers. He began making desperate efforts to counterattack and push back the Ottoman advances on his center and right. A long melee continued, as many from both sides fell on the plain of Bredfield, where the sounds of swords and screams echoed throughout the battlefield. It was during this critical counterattack that Isa Bey was knocked off his horse and killed, causing a great panic in the Turkish army, resulting in their rout. Now the army of Ali Bey watched in confusion and horror as they too began retreating down south, seeing that the day was lost. With the Ottoman right now withdrawn from the battle, Paul Kanizhi's Hungarians and Seke infantry surged forward and began circling around the now collapsing Ottoman center. Many Akinjis were killed in this charge, which saw the Turkish camp plundered and captured slaves freed. After 5 grueling hours of combat, the Battle of Bredfield came to a bloody close. While Báthory's army had lost well over 3,000 men during the battle, around half of the Turkish host lay dead, wounded, or captured alongside their plunder. Like Hunyadi's famous defense of Belgrade back in 1456, the victory at Bredfield was celebrated throughout Hungary and wider Europe, and it marked a rare occasion in which the Ottoman army was defeated in battle. However, while the remnants of Ali Bey's shattered army regrouped in Wallachia, new pressing matters had emerged back in the Ottoman capital. Bredfield was a significant setback to Turkish expansion in the Balkans, but Mehmed's true ambitions lay across the Adriatic in Italy. Since the famous conquest of Constantinople, the Sultan had always eyed the lands where the Roman state was born. According to him, the new red apple was ready to be plucked, just as the old red apple had been back in 1453. In the next episode of our series on the Ottoman Empire, we will examine the last years of...
Mehmed halusi olla roomalainen, mutta katsotaanpa miten Ottomaanien imperiumissa oli hyvin laajalti käytössä sharia-laki, ja sharia-lakihan sallii orjuuden, mikä on tosi kiva ja mukavaa. Katsotaanpas miten sitä sovellettiin.
They called it the heart of civilization, a realm of glittering domes, silk-lined halls, and divine order. Yet beneath the marble floors of Istanbul's palaces, and behind the ornate calligraphy of imperial decrees, there beat another heart, one made of iron, not faith. The Ottoman Empire, spanning 3 continents, 6 centuries, and millions of lives, was an empire built not only by conquest, but by captives. Before the Atlantic slave ships carved their scars across history, before chains rattled on the shores of the New World, there was another slave system, older, quieter, but vast. From the snows of the Balkans to the deserts of Sudan, the Ottoman world thrived on human bondage. Christians, Africans, Slavs, Circassians, bought, sold, converted, or broken. Their labor.
Olen pahoillani, mutta mä vaihan videota kesken. Löysin paremmalta tekijältä.
Just like in the rest of the ancient world, slavery was a common practice in Arabia centuries before the coming of Islam. Sources tell about slaves being brought to Arabia from the Middle East, India and other countries. But the biggest source of slaves in pre-Islamic Arabia were African slaves from present-day Ethiopia, Eritrea, Mozambique, Kenya, and so on. Old Arabic poetry tells about dark-skinned foreign slaves called Habash. Slavery persisted after Islam became the law of the land in Arabia, and expanded with the territorial advance of the Caliphate as well. How did slavery in Arabia transform following the ascent of Islam? What kind of work were the slaves forced to do in the territory of the Caliphate? In this episode, Kings and Generals is going to talk about slavery in the Caliphate. Medieval soldiers were enticed with promises of war spoils, life-changing treasures that may or may not actually materialize, which they may or may not live to spend. It's risk-reward, and we've got an experience that captures this idea with our sponsor, Expedition Agartha. It's a blend of first-person medieval combat focused on melee action and looter games, where you progress through better and better gear. The catch here is that while powerful gear is worth striving for, you can lose it again if something goes wrong. That's the high risk, the high reward being that you'll need advanced gear to survive the grueling PvP and PvE encounters. Check it out on Steam or via our link in the description. Slavery in Arabia goes back to the pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah, ignorance period. Arabia had several sources.
Jahiliyyah eli siis muslimithan kutsuu kaikkia, jotka ei ole muslimia, niin että ne on tyhmiä ja tietämättömiä. Jos sä et ole muslimi, sä oot tyhmä ja tietämätön. Ja ne kutsuu arabiaa ja niitä aikoja ennen kuin islam on tullut valaistamaan ihmiset ja sivistämään heidät, niin he kutsuu sivistämättömyyden ajaksi.
Of slave supply, and the largest among them were conflicts. Arabs would raid bordering Byzantine and Persian provinces for the purposes of getting war booty and slaves, and the Ajami, Iraqi slaves, were prominent among them. Intertribal conflict within Arabia would result in the victorious side taking the surviving members of the losing tribe as prisoners, but most of them were ransomed before they could be turned into slaves. But the majority of slaves were imported from Africa. Mecca was a major trading center of the region at the time, and trade caravans, including those which transported African slaves, were going through Mecca. Arab slave owners would purchase them in Mecca. Also, raiding parties would attack caravans and capture slaves for themselves or sell them later. There were two types of slaves, purchased ones and slaves born in the house of their master. Arabia's climate and terrain limited the scope of work in which slaves could be used, but they would work as servants of rich Arabs, as shepherds, and as caravan guides. Female slaves would also be used for sexual purposes. In theory, Islam saw a natural state of a human being as being free, stated as al-asa huwa il-hurriya. Islam brought some limitations and regulations to slavery in Arabia, but slavery was such an ordinary phenomenon for that age, along with being a fundamental element of Arab society, that it was not possible to outright prohibit slavery. All of the Arab elite, including the Prophet, owned slaves. But at the same time, there are numerous Quranic verses and hadiths describing the emancipation of slaves by the Prophet Muhammad, such as Bilal, who became the first muezzin, caller for prayer in the history of Islam, and Zayd, Muhammad's stepson. During his farewell sermon, Muhammad said, "An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab has any superiority over an Arab. Also, a white has no superiority over black, nor a black has any superiority over white, except by piety and good action." Historians Neusner and Son argue that prohibiting slavery in the context of 7th century Arabia apparently would have been as useful as prohibiting poverty. It would have reflected a noble ideal, but would have been unworkable on an immediate basis without establishing an entirely new socio-economic system. And its recommendation that slaves be freed is on the same plane as its recommendation that the poor be clothed and the hungry be fed. Thus, slavery was not prohibited in Islam. But the ascension of the Islamic Caliphate led to some reforms in terms of treatment of slaves, their release, and amended procedures related to enslavement. The Quran stated that a slave Muslim is better than a free pagan, that it was better to marry a slave Muslim female than a free pagan. Islam barred Muslims from enslaving other Muslims, called for humane and kind treatment of slaves, and prohibited killing them. The Abbasid Caliph al-Mutasim freed 8,000 of his slaves on his deathbed as manumission was encouraged by Islam. A child born to a freeman father and a slave mother was considered free. This slave woman could not be sold off anymore and would be set free upon the death of the master. The state prohibited freemen from selling their children into slavery as a punishment for debt or a crime. Despite this, the slave population increased due to purchase through military campaigns, commercial purchase, procreation of slaves, and interstate agreements, where the Caliphate insisted on payment of tribute through the import of slaves. People of the book, Jews and Christians, were safe from being enslaved, but Muslims could purchase Jewish and Christian slaves.
niin kauan kuin sä maksoit suojelusrahan. Koska säkin olit monoteisti, jos sä olit juutalainen tai kristitty, ja muslimi tuli sun ovelle koputtaa, niin sun piti maksaa kyllä suojelusrahat. Kyllä sä muuten sä joudut kyllä orjat.
In case they had become slaves before their purchase, but it was allowed to turn pagans into slaves, even if they would decide to convert to Islam. Moreover, there was a distinction in terms of enslavement between Dar al-Islam, the realm of Islam, and Dar al-Harb, the realm of war. Dar al-Islam was the territory where Islam was prevalent, and therefore the laws of peacetime applied, while Dar al-Harb was the territory dominated by non-believers who did not recognize Allah and Muhammad as his prophet, therefore a peacetime law did not apply there. This loophole
Edelleenkin sharia-lain mukaan tämä pätee, mikä meinaa efektiivisesti teologisesti islamin mukaan. Jokainen Suomessa asuva muslimi on tosiasiassa jihadissa niin kauan kuin maan laki on islam.
was used to import slaves who were already Muslims, or for the castration of slaves, a practice which was prohibited by Islam. Although good treatment of slaves was encouraged by Islam, slaves were essentially rightless. Their testimonies were not admitted at judicial proceedings. Offence against slaves required half of the punishment envisaged for the same offence against freemen. Slaves were not allowed to enter into a contract, and so on. The death rate of slaves was quite high, particularly among those employed for plantation and mining slavery. On the other hand, the vast majority of slaves lived under better conditions than, for instance, their counterparts in ancient Greece and Rome. Masters were obliged to provide slaves with medical attention, shelter, and support in old age, and were prohibited from overworking them. They could be forced by Islamic courts to emancipate a slave whom they had mistreated. In some cases, slaves had a contractual right to buy their freedom over time, or be emancipated upon the master's death. The expansion of the caliphate and its military successes were the primary sources of slave supply. People of different races and beliefs, such as Assyrians, Copts, Persians, Nubians, Berbers, Indians, Greeks, Turks, Slavs, etc., were enslaved by the caliphate. Slaves were acquired from all over the Middle East, Egypt, Iran, the Caucasus, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, India, Spain, Central and Eastern Europe, even China and Southeast Asia. A significant part of the slave supply of Arabia, even before Islam, was from Africa, with countries like Ethiopia and Nubia being the most prominent in this regard. This continued after the ascension of Islam too, and historian Yosef ben Yochanan argues that jihads were brought to Africa as early as the year 640 AD. The expansion of the caliphate into Egypt and sub-Saharan Africa, into what the Arabs called Balad ul-Sudan, the land of the blacks, enabled a higher supply of African slaves into the empire. This supply was both from military conquest and booty, along with treaties signed with African states, where they agreed to supply the caliphate with slaves annually. Moreover, Arabs set up slave trading posts along the southeastern coast of the Indian Ocean, including the archipelago of Zanzibar. This paved the way for the major African slave trade to the caliphate. Black African slaves were sold in slave markets in Egypt, South Arabia, and the Maghreb. Historian Paul Lovejoy estimates that close to 10 million Africans were shipped out as slaves to Arabia and the Caliphate. According to him, every year 5,000 Africans were brought to Arabia as slaves between the years 650 and 1600. Luis Felipe Jalen Castro argues that 8 million African people were sold or sent into slavery through the Oriental and Trans-Saharan slavery routes between the 8th and 19th centuries. Historians might disagree on the numbers, going as high as 30 million, but the truth is that millions of Africans were forced to live and work as slaves in the Caliphate. The slave trade from Africa to Arab countries continued right until the beginning of the 20th century. For instance, slavery in Saudi Arabia was formally abolished as late as 1962, in Oman in 1970. Africa had become a pragmatic choice for slave supply of the Caliphate, as towards the 8th century, most of the borders of the Arab Caliphate had already become more or less stable. There were fewer expansionist wars, which meant there were fewer slaves imported. By then, the Eastern Roman Empire and the Frankish Kingdom, bordering the Iberian possessions of the Caliphate, had become strong enough to oppose further expansion of the caliphate. Moreover, they were people of the book, and enslavement of Christians was a legally problematic matter. For instance, in the 9th century, the Egyptian Christians rebelled against the caliphate, and following their defeat, many of them were sold as slaves in Damascus. According to the historian Adam Metz, this was widely criticized in the caliphate and was considered absolutely illegal. In contrast, sub-Saharan Africa did not have a political entity strong enough to oppose the caliphate, and it had maintained and enhanced its position as one of the major sources of slave supply for the caliphate. Unlike the slaves in the Americas, where they were mostly forced to work in manual labor jobs, such as working on plantations and mining, in the caliphate, slaves were used in a wider scope of jobs. In the Americas, slaves were a major tool of production, while in the caliphate they were mostly used in service jobs or for military purposes. Slaves worked as servants, nurses, concubines, entertainers, eunuchs, business assistants, craftsmen, builders, and soldiers. There were also types of slave jobs which existed in the Jahiliyyah period but were prohibited by Islam, such as masters forcing female slaves into prostitution for their personal material gain. Some of the jobs, particularly being a soldier or taking part in administration and business, allowed for upward social mobility for slaves, and Mamluk slaves are the perfect example of the former. In general, slaves working in domestic and urban settings were not subject to overworking and cruelty, and the problem with the Arab historiography of that period is that it's very much focused on urban Arabia, not only with regard to the issue of slavery, but in general. Slaves working in rural settings are largely overlooked, despite being subject to the hardest living conditions among the slaves of Arabia. They were mostly employed in agriculture, mining, and the drainage of marshes. These were mostly black slaves, who were more prone to being overworked, being subject to cruelty, and living in worse conditions, often crammed in dozens in small spaces. It is said that no slave lived for longer than 5 years in the Saharan salt mines. Extremely hard living and working conditions existed in cotton and...
Että on paljon orjia pienessä tilassa asumassa. Edelleenkin on. Muotos. Oho. Tämä on modernein ja rauhallisin arabimaa ja sielläkin on 132 000 orjaa tälläkin hetkellä. Kukaan ei puhu tästä. Miksei kukaan puhu tästä? Katsotaan, se oli UAE. Montako orjaa Saudi-Arabiassa on? Katsotaan. Oho. Mitä? 740 000 ihmistä elää orjaolosuhteissa. Kaikki ulkomaalaisia työntekijöitä tuotu sinne ja huijattu orjaolosuhteisiin. Mitäs tää tapahtuu? Edelleenkin ihan sama meininki. Täysin sama meininki. Ei ole muuttunut lainkaan.
Sugar fields. The slave labor of the black slaves, Zanj as the Arabs called them, in the marshlands and salt flats of southern Iraq are among the most vivid examples of cruelty against slaves in the caliphate. But white slaves were brought to the caliphate as well, and were mostly employed in the military, as business associates, and for entertainment of the Arab elite. This demonstrated the existence of racial discrimination.
Hyvin pitkään about kaikissa yhteiskunnissa, varsinkin vähän kuumemmissa maissa, vaalea iho on ollut aina haluttua, pidetty arvokkaana, pidetty kivan näköisenä, on ollut kauneusihannetta, koska korkeamman statuksen omaavat ihmiset ei ollut yhtä ruskettuneita kuin joka päivä pellolla työskentelemässä. Saatoit nähdä ihmisestä, että toi on vain joku pelto-orja, että sillä ei ole statusta, kun se on noin tumma. Eurooppalaiset, kun sattuu olemaan valmiiksi hemmetin vaaleita, vaikka ne olisikin vaan pelto-orjia tai jotain, niin nyt pidettiin hyvän näköisinä, niin varsinkin naisia. Valkoiset naiset oli kuumaa tavaraa.
discrimination in the caliphate, despite the fact that Islam considered all human beings equal regardless of the color of their skin. Most of the white slaves were Slavic and Turkic. Slavs were considered more expensive than Turks, and were brought into the caliphate through Germany to Spain. Prague was also one of the centers of the slave trade from Europe to the caliphate. Meanwhile, Turkic slaves were mostly sold in the slave market of Samarkand. A good-looking white slave woman would cost 1,000 dinars. In some cases, this cost would go as high as 10,000 dinars.
Se oli vähän niin kuin ostaisi auton nykyään. Vähän niin kuin ostaisi uuden auton nykyään, niin se orjan hinta oli about sama. Ei kaikilla todellakaan ollut orjia, rikkailla oli orjia. Rikkailla perheillä ja suvuilla oli orjia, koska 1,000–10 000 dinaaria on kumminkin aika paljon rahaa. Että sä sait hyvän näköinen valkoinen nainen, saattaa olla 10 000 dinaaria, varsinkin jos sillä oli jotain taitoja, että se osaa soittaa jotain tai tanssia tai jotain. Kun taas joku musta orjanainen, niin 150–300 dinaaria. Muhammed itsekin haditeissa, kun Muhammed ostaa valkoisia orjia, niin hän kauppaa useamman mustan orjan vastineeksi.
In contrast, a good-looking black slave woman would cost 150 to 300 dinars. Black male slaves would cost even less. Their purchase was around 25 to 30 dinars. A special category of slaves in the caliphate were those specialized in arts and entertainment, who were educated by their masters and then sold to the Arab elite for massive sums. 1,000 to 2,000 dinars was the average cost of an entertainer. In 937,
Eli jos sä oot valkoinen, hyvän näköinen ja sulla on jotain taitoa, sä osaat soittaa, sä osaat tanssia, sä osaat kertoa runoja, sä osaat viihdyttää, niin silloin se orjan hinta oli erittäin korkea. Ja niin kuin toi sanoi, monet orjan omistajat saattoi niin kuin kouluttaa esim. Pikkutyttöjen pienestä iästä lähtien kunnon palvelija viihdyttäjiksi ja sitten myi niitä muille arabieliitille. Tosi mukavaa meininkiä jälleen kerran. Islamilainen maailma on kiva.
The de facto ruler of the caliphate, Ibn Raik, purchased a popular female singer for 14,000 dinars. While Islam alleviated the suffering of slaves and placed certain restrictions on their abuse and encouraged good treatment of slaves, their lives were extremely hard. Slaves working in agriculture, mining and construction had a shorter lifespan and were more susceptible to ill treatment. One of the sites of cruel and inhumane treatment of slaves was the Basra marshlands in southern Iraq, where black slaves were forced to work under horrible conditions. They rebelled against the caliphate in 869 and would trouble the state for more than 2 decades. In our upcoming episode, we're going to talk about the Zanj rebellion, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing. It helps immensely.
Haluatteko katsoa tuon orjakapinan videon? Mä kyllä haluan katsoa. Katsotaanko orjat kapinoi?
Slavery is a grimly ubiquitous feature of human history, common across all nations and cultures, and Arabia is no exception. While the rise of Islam came with the introduction of slavery-related rules, which made the practice a touch less inhumane, the ugly reality is that this horrible phenomenon persisted in the Arab world right up until the 20th century. Of course, so long as men are kept in chains, so too will they fight to be free of them. So it was that in the 9th century, a colossal insurrection erupted in the marshlands of southern Iraq, spiraling into a massive conflict which would shake the mighty Abbasid Caliphate to its very core. Welcome to our video on the Zanj Rebellion, the largest slave revolt in Islamic history. This video was initially available only to our YouTube members and patrons. We fund our free content through our program of exclusive videos made for our members and patrons who get 2 documentaries per week not available to the public. Join their ranks and watch the series on the Albigensian Crusade, Fall of Sparta, and more. We're enjoying our member able to watch.
Thank you very much.
Before we dive into the rebellion itself, we need to provide some context on who the titular Zanj were. Traditionally, Zanj is considered to be an ethnic exonym referring to East African slaves of Bantu origin. However, the Zanj were likely
Somaliassa
not a
pidetään
specific
edelleenkin
ethnicity.
bantuperäisiä. Somaliassa pidetään tänä päivänäkin bantuperäisiä somaleja alempiarvoisina orjarotuna. Ja puolet somaleista kuvittelee olemansa arabeja, ylempää rotua.
It's rather a generalized term coined by Arabs and Persians for many African linguistic and culture groups who lived on the east coast of the continent. Whatever the nomenclature, it is true that during the golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate, thousands of black slaves were imported from East.
Siinä on somalibantuja. Niitä pidetään Somaliassa ja Somalilandiassa alempiarvoisina somaleina, koska ne on vähän niinku orja.
East Africa into Iraq to work in extremely brutal and inhospitable conditions.
Mut Suomi on rasistinen
Generally,
maa.
they were used to drain swamps and
Sinne
marshlands,
tulee tänne valittaa,
clean
että
salt
aika täällä on
flats by
rasistista.
removing the salt crust, extract salt from seawater, and subsequently cultivate cotton and sugarcane on the lands they reclaimed. On top of the back-breaking labor they were forced to do, the Zanj also lived in miserable conditions. Often living in camps of 500 to 5,000, they sheltered in small huts made of reeds and palm leaves, situated amidst the marshlands they worked in, which were breeding grounds for malaria-carrying mosquitoes. As one might expect, the Zanj slave's diet was as meager as his accommodations, as he was made to subsist only on a small amount of flour, semolina, and dates. By and large, these harsh living and working conditions created a sense of solidarity among the slaves working in southern Iraq, uniting peoples of different ethnic, linguistic, and religious origins under the ignoble burden of their shared chains. This paved the way for organized resistance. In 689,
Edelleenkin noiden orjien jälkeläisiä Irakissa on about 2 miljoonaa tänä päivänä afro-irakilaista, joista osa edelleenkin puhuu swahilia arabian lisäksi. Sama juttu Palestiinassa. Palestiinassa on afro-palestiinalaisia, jotka asuvat Al-Abedin kaupungin osassa Gazassa, joka tarkoittaa palvelijain orjain kaupungin osa. Noin 11 000 orjien jälkeläistä löytyy jopa tänä päivänä Palestiinasta. Mielenkiintoisia juttuja. Montakaan orjien jälkeläistä löytyy Suomesta, kun Suomi on näin rasistinen kolonialisti. Äärioikeista maksimo.
9 and 694, the Zanj slaves revolted against their masters. Sources from this era are scant about these rebellions, but the fact they occurred at all proved that southern Iraq was a breeding ground for future slave rebellions. The rebellions of the 7th century were but preludes to a much larger and deadlier revolt, which began 2 centuries later in 869. At the time, the Abbasid Caliphate was slowly disintegrating. Its Iberian possessions had been usurped by a prince of their traditional dynastic rival, the Umayyads. Moreover, the Idrisid dynasty had overthrown caliphal rule in Morocco in the late 8th century, while the Aghlabid dynasty ended Abbasid rule in North Africa in the early 9th century. To compound matters, independent states were also forming on the eastern frontier of the caliphate in Persia and Central Asia. Other crises, such as the decade of anarchy in Samarra, civil wars in the heart of the empire, the killing of the Caliph al-Mu'taz, the secession of Egypt under the Tulunid dynasty, and the expansion of the Saffarids in Persia, all contributed to the perfect storm which led to ideal conditions for a slave rebellion in southern Iraq. Indeed, the treatment of the Zanj slaves had not improved since the rebellions of the 7th century. More and more slaves were being imported from East Africa to work in harsh conditions in southern Iraq, which only exacerbated the existing grievances. It is here at this critical junction that a man named Ali ibn Muhammad enters onto the scene. Some portray him as the hero of the enslaved, while others see him only as an opportunist who saw the unrest in Iraq as a perfect environment to gain more political capital. Whatever his motivations, Ali ibn Muhammad was nonetheless the critical catalyst of the Zanj rebellion. So before we dive into the rebellion proper, let us first examine the backstory of the man who would ignite it. Ali ibn Muhammad's origins are unclear. He himself asserted that he was born to the lineage of Ali ibn Abi Talib, who in Shia Islam is considered the rightful successor to the Prophet for the seat of the Caliphate. Other sources, however, have argued that he was of Persian origin. In any case, Ali ibn Muhammad first became significant in 863 when he moved to Bahrain, one of the most important Shiite centers in the Caliphate. This is where he claimed to be related to Imam Ali, and as a result, he quickly became popular among the local tribes and the general population.
Kaikki muslimijohtajat ja uskonoppineet ja tällaiset, ne aina väittää, että joo, mä oon suku jollekin suurelle imaamille, mä oon suoraan Muhammedin jälkeläinen.
At one point, they started revering Ali ibn Muhammad as a prophet and king, and taxes started being collected in his name. This attempt for political glory failed when the Abbasids took notice of Ali's antics and defeated an army of his supporters in battle. As a result, Ali lost his credibility in Bahrain and fled to Basra in southern Iraq with his closest followers. There, he intended to capitalize on the ongoing struggle of two clans in the city by winning the support of one of the groups, while attempting to rebuild his religious following by personally preaching a sermon at the main mosque of Basra, which was obviously seen as rabble-rousing by the local authorities, who put him and his companions under arrest. Ali ibn Muhammad was imprisoned in Wasit, but he was able to flee and made his way to Baghdad with his loyal associate, a black freeman named Suleiman ibn Jami. There they started recruiting the local slaves to his cause. One of these slaves was an African, Rayhan ibn Salih, who was something of a foreman, in charge of his master's other slaves, who were based in Basra. Perhaps seeing the slaves of Basra as his path to power, Ali promised to make Rayhan his commander in a fight to win justice for the Zanj slaves. It is said that the next day, Rayhan returned with another slave named Rafiq, who brought with him a banner saying, "God has purchased the souls of believers and their property, for they have attained to paradise fighting in the way of God." On the 9th of September 869, the Zanj rebellion began when Ali ibn Muhammad and his group started intercepting groups of slaves in Basra marshlands, preaching to them to join their struggle. Ali vowed to fight to improve the living conditions of these slaves and called himself their savior, sent by Allah. To that end, he adopted the egalitarian doctrine of the Kharijite sect, which stated that the most qualified man should reign, even if he was an Abyssinian slave. By the end of the year, 15,000 slaves and poor freemen joined the Zanj rebellion.
Joo, ja katsotaan tämän videon jälkeen, kuinka muslimit rakensi USA.
Symbolic spearhead, Ali ibn Muhammad became known as Sahib al-Zanj, the master of the Zanj, and started his Friday sermons with the Kharijite slogan, "God is great, God is great, there is no God but Allah, and God is great, no arbitration except by God." During his sermons, he pledged to improve the social standing of the Zanj slaves and promised them wealth and slaves of their own. This demonstrates that the goal of Ali and the Zanj rebellion was not to abolish slavery.
Miten saat orjat puolelles? Hei, kannata mua, niin mä vapautan sut ja sit säkin saat orjia. It sounds like a plan.
Entirely, but rather to improve the conditions of the specific slaves serving under him. Initially, the Abbasids did not pay much attention to the Zanj rebellion, mired as they were in many other aforementioned crises of the time. This allowed the Zanj to score some important early victories, despite an apparent lack in proper arms and armor. It is said that in one of the first major battles between the rebels and caliphal forces, one of the Zanj rebels charged into battle with nothing but a plate, demonstrating both the resoluteness of the rebels and their poor equipment. Nevertheless, early victories against smaller imperial units allowed the Zanj to gain supplies of weapons, boats, horses and food. It should be noted that during all this, Ali had to command his army through the use of several interpreters, demonstrating that the Zanj rebellion did not consist of a single ethnic or language group, and was probably a mix of black
Ali vaan
slaves of
käytti
different
orjat,
ethnic backgrounds.
omana
As
armeijana,
previously
lupasi
touched
niille
upon,
omia.
the Zanj
Ali lupasi vähän omia ja oli silleen, että hei, tuu vähän mun karjaamaan.
rebellion consisted not only of slaves, but also a smaller number of poor freemen, urban craftsmen, and peasants. Nevertheless, the indentured made up the bulk of Zanj forces, as hundreds and thousands of liberated slaves joined their ranks after every victory. For the Caliphate, perhaps the worst blow of all came when the black slave soldiers in their army began deserting to join the insurrection. Early Zanj victories were possible due to a number of factors. Firstly, the Zanj knew the marshlands very well, and this familiarity created an important advantage against the Caliphate armies. Secondly, the Zanj were aware of their own weaknesses, and preferred to use guerrilla warfare against smaller, more isolated units of Abbasid troops, instead of facing the imperial army head-on. Third, despite their nature as a multi-ethnic group of irregular militias, the Zanj army was very disciplined, and used this advantage to maximum effect. Even Zanj women took part in some of the battles, mainly by helping their men run supplies, but sometimes also throwing bricks at the enemy. After a rush of initial successes, which saw the rebels take the ports of Uballa and Abadan, the Zanj turned their attention to an important city of the region, Basra. However, their initial attempt to take this bastion failed, so instead, they decided to build their own capital city on a dry plain southeast of Basra, calling it Al-Mukhtar, the Elect City. Al-Mukhtar was built to be an impregnable citadel. It was surrounded by several canals, the largest of which was divided by 2 bridges, and was enclosed by a large iron chain and 2 large barriers. Catapults protected the city, which consisted of clusters of buildings built out of bricks and palm leaves, the largest of which were Ali's palace, a mosque, a prison, and several markets in the city centre. Only 2 years after the start of their rebellion, the Zanj started to mint their own currency, which was used for trade with Bedouin merchants, upon whom the rebels heavily depended for food and other crucial provisions. Not content with their improvised but surprisingly sophisticated capital, the Zanj rebellion marched on in 871, when it finally took Basra in September of that year. The capture of the city resulted in an indiscriminate massacre of its inhabitants. The Arab historian al-Masudi claims that the Zanj left 300,000 corpses in their wake, but that number was probably exaggerated. In any case, the Zanj continued causing problems to the Caliphate by cutting off Baghdad's supply lines from the south. Then, in the following year, the rebels took Wasit and its surroundings, managing to extend their territory to within 50 miles of Baghdad. With the rebels now so close to their most spiritually significant city, the Abbasids had no other option but to focus on the Zanj, who had become a real threat to their rule and the caliphal status quo. In 880, the Caliph's brother, Al-Muwaffaq, was sent to defeat the Zanj army. In addition to ground troops, his forces consisted of a large fleet, which was important to ensure the blockade of the Zanj and the mobile movement of the Caliphate's army in tough terrain. In a couple of years, Al-Muwaffaq managed to inflict several defeats on the Zanj, pushing them back into their capital city of Al-Mukhtar. Thus, he commenced with the blockade of the city. Merchants bringing supplies to Al-Mukhtar were prevented from doing so, which soon resulted in widespread starvation within the city walls. To further put on the pressure, Al-Muwaffaq built a fort city of his own facing Al-Mukhtar and named it Al-Muwaffaqiyya. From there, he hurled molten lead at the Zanj capital. Seeking to end this conflict quickly, Al-Muwaffaq offered amnesty to the Zanj rebels, promising they would not be returned to slavery, in an attempt to break their resolve to fight to the death. In 883, another Abbasid commander, Lulu, requested to join forces with Al-Muwaffaq. This swelled the numbers of the besieging army to a whopping 50,000, and on the 5th of August 883, the united caliphal forces launched a full frontal assault on the rebel city. After 6 days of battle, Al-Mukhtar fell, Ali ibn Muhammad was beheaded, and the Zanj rebellion was over. At the end of the day, the Zanj rebellion is a hard conflict to define. As we have established, it was not a rebellion of any particular ethnic group, nor did it aim to end slavery in the caliphate. It was probably a reactionary rebellion, ignited in response to all the injustice suffered by the slaves working in the Basra marshlands, but without any concrete revolutionary or political goals, like abolishing slavery or democratizing the governance in the caliphate. The racial element of the rebellion is very important to consider as well, as the vast majority of people participating in the Zanj rebellion were black slaves from sub-Saharan Africa. A racial hierarchy existed among the slaves of the caliphate, as white slaves were generally more expensive and considered more able than their black counterparts. It is not a coincidence then that black African slaves were imported to work in the southern Iraqi marshlands, which might have been the toughest place to be a slave in the caliphate. There is a long list of indicators of the existence of racial discrimination in the caliphate, perhaps best embodied in a common Arab proverb of the time: the hungry Zanj steals, the sated Zanj rapes. According to the Muslim theologist of
Oh no, Zanj on niinku musta.
the 8th century,
Zenji. Vieläkin Turkissa, turkin kielessäkin Zenji tarkoittaa mustaa.
Hasan al-Basri, the worst slaves are the Zanj. Overall, Muslim theologists, rulers and thinkers tried to justify their racial discrimination in various ways, one of which was through interpreting the biblical story in which Ham, the son of Noah, was cursed, and his descendants, the sub-Saharan Africans, had black skin as the sign of this curse. Another was to rely on the Aristotelian assertion that slaves were slaves by nature. Undoubtedly, such blatant discrimination played a major role in the rebellion. Seeing a constant influx of slaves with the same color as themselves definitely increased the sense of racial solidarity among the Zanj. Ali ibn Muhammad probably understood this, as he constantly surrounded himself with black generals to lead the rebellion. Indeed, as the rebellion went on, Ali gradually became less active in its leadership. The construction of Al-Muqtara, for example, was likely the exclusive work of black slaves. Despite its defeat, the Zanj rebellion had several major consequences. For one thing, large-scale plantation slavery, which we would see later in history in the Americas, would never be practiced again in the Arab world. The effect the rebellion had on exacerbating the decline of the Abbasid regime cannot be understated either, as the agricultural lands of southern Iraq were devastated, leading to major decreases in food production and tax revenues for the throne. The decline of the Abbasid Caliphate only continued after this, which we're going to describe in our future episode.
Aivan. Ja nyt kun mainitsit tuosta, kuinka muslimit on kuulemma rakentanut Amerikat ja Helsinginkin on rakentanut somalit aikoinaan, jotka Helsinki on oikeasti, Suomi on kolonialisti rasistinen maa, missä on tervattua laivoja. Katsotaanpas, miten muslimit on rakentanut oikeasti koko maailman. Ja sen takia Suomessakin pitäisi olla sharia-laki.
Mehdi Hasan, poster boy for the modern Red-Green Alliance, and one of the reasons Piers Morgan's show is so unbearable to watch. He has exploded in popularity, partly because the Islamic population in numerous Western English-speaking countries has also grown significantly in the past decade. With that growth has come a louder voice, one increasingly comfortable demanding recognition and reframing the West through an Islamic lens. Historical revisionism, in fact. How did this happen? Well, Matt Walsh put out a tweet responding to a video featuring Mr. Hassan, which I'll get to in a second, where he says, "Christianity built this country. Islam did not at all in even the slightest way. That's why we can have our church bells, you ungrateful little," and so on. In response, Mehdi put out a rather interesting tweet. 1 in 3 of the slaves who built this country were Muslims. They were here long before the Walsh family arrived. You would know that if you had studied history, but I know MAGA has an issue with studying. Oh, and I'm guessing you don't count slaves as people or Americans. Ah yes, how grateful he is, this new American. So Mehdi Hasan claims that...
Koska ne samat mustat orjat, joita Mehdi Hassanin esi-isät orjutti ja käänsi mustiksi, sattuivat ehkä heidän jälkeläiset päätymään Amerikkaan joskus 6 kertaa lyhyemmäksi ajaksi, niin kenen syy se on? What? Jos olet Arabiassa, sä tulet valittaa muiden ihmisten orjuuden käyttämisestä nyt sitten niinku ihan oikeasti. Itse on ollut historian pahimmat orjuttajat, mitä löytyy.
1 in 3 of the slaves who built America were Muslims. It sounds profound until you realize it's pure historical fiction. Most credible historians estimate that only 10 to 15% of enslaved Africans brought to North America were Muslim, and even that figure is generous. Many came from regions where Islam had spread unevenly, and within a generation, most had converted to Christianity or abandoned Islam entirely. To inflate that number to 1/3 is not truth-telling. It's stolen valor through historical revisionism. It's a way of inserting Islam into the American story where it never belonged, to rewrite the moral architecture of the nation itself. In fact, the reality is that America was not built by Muslims, but by free men and women under a Christian moral framework. The founders themselves were steeped in biblical imagery and Enlightenment reasoning, a combination that gave America both liberty and law. George Washington once said, "It is impossible to rightly govern a nation without God and the Bible." John Adams called the Constitution made only for moral and religious people. That moral base wasn't Islamic. It was unmistakably Christian in worldview and Western in its philosophy of freedom. Now, before we get to the next part, if you enjoyed this video so far, please remember to give the video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and consider signing up on Patreon, which comes with a ton of perks. Slavery, as horrific as it was, did not define that moral foundation. Overcoming it did. America's defining struggle was to end slavery, not justify it. And it didn't find that moral courage in the Quran, but in the Declaration of Independence, when Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal." Those words would become the ideological dagger that eventually killed slavery, a concept alien to the theocratic worldview of Islam, where equality exists only among believers. And ironically, the young United States would fight its first war as a nation to end slavery, not within its borders, but against it. The Barbary Wars were fought after Muslim states in North Africa.
Pahimmat on näköjään ne, jotka taisteli sen lopettamiseksi, on ne pahimmat. Länsi lopetti orjuuden, niin ne on ne pahimmat. Hyi! Kuinka kehtaatte? Miksi te ette vaan jatkanut sitä?
Africa began capturing and enslaving American sailors, demanding ransom and tribute in exchange for their freedom. It was that very conflict that led to the creation of the US Navy, forged to put an end to Islamic piracy and slave taking. In other words,
Tämäkin on totta. USA-laivasto alun perin motivoitui. Laivasto perustettiin nimenomaan sen takia, koska barbaryn merirosvot, eli muslimi Ottomaanit merirosvot ja ynnä muut, ryösti näitä laivoja. Ja sitten kun USA kysyi näiltä, että miksi me ollaan tehty teille mitään, me ollaan Eurooppa, me ollaan Vatikaani, me ei olla kirkko, me ollaan USA, me ei ole tehty teille mitään. Miksi te hyökkäätte meidän laivoihin? Niin sieltä oltiin vaan turkkilaiset ja Ottomaanit oli vastannut, että te olette vääräuskoisia. Me vihataan teitä Allahin vuoksi. Niin yksinkertaisesti se on.
America's earliest fight as a sovereign power was literally against those who sought to enslave its people under the banner of Islam. The very system Mehdi defends has a far darker legacy when it comes to slavery. For over 1,000 years before the Atlantic trade, Muslim empires enslaved millions of Africans, men, women and children, in brutal trans-Saharan and Indian Ocean trades. Unlike in America, most never saw freedom and their descendants vanished into history. You can watch more about Islam's history of colonization and slavery in this video on my channel below. Mehdi's revision isn't harmless. It's an attempt to graft Islam onto a civilization that grew precisely because it rejected that kind of rule. America's soul was carved out of rebellion against dogma, the same dogma he now wants to pretend was part of its birth. The same dogma that the media and institutions are now trying to sell to you as some sort of peaceful ideology, completely compatible with Western democracy. But if you disagree, they accuse you with buzzwords, and many are clamping down opposing voices with legislation. That's exactly why I use Proton VPN and why I think the team behind their stealth announced privacy. Look, all of this did come out of nowhere. It was a result of a clip that's blown up online.
I think that if you can play church bells, you can pray the call to prayer. We are as American as anyone else, and don't take any BS from anyone.
Now, it's a good line, if you're completely clueless on American history, that is. Beneath that soundbite is a complete misunderstanding of what freedom of religion actually meant to the people who founded the United States. When Jefferson, Madison, and the rest of the founders debated religious liberty, they weren't talking about Islam. They weren't even thinking about it. It's laughable anybody could think otherwise. The conversation was about sects of Christianity, Protestants, Catholics, Quakers, groups who shared the same broad moral universe but differed on doctrine. Jefferson's famous line, "It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg," wasn't written to defend a theocracy. It was a plea to limit religious coercion. The idea was simple: your faith is your business, so long as it doesn't infringe on anyone else's freedom. That concept was revolutionary. It emerged out of centuries of European conflict, Catholics burning Protestants, Protestants persecuting Catholics, and the founders wanted a clean break. They weren't handing a blank check to every ideology on earth. They were creating a nation where reason and faith could coexist under secular law. Islam, by contrast, has never drawn that line. There is no separation of mosque and state in Islamic history because Islam doesn't recognize such a distinction. Mahdi is not asking for equality, he is implying equivalence. But church bells aren't political declarations. The Islamic call to prayer is 5 times a day, by the way. It's a literal call to submission, to the supremacy of Allah, to the exclusivity of Islam. But we also need to call out the glaring hypocrisy here. The same ideology demanding its voice be heard in Western cities silences every other faith in its own heartlands. In Saudi Arabia, it's illegal to build a church or wear a cross in public. In Pakistan, a single accusation of blasphemy can get you lynched. In Iran, converts to Christianity are imprisoned or executed. Even in so-called moderate states, non-Muslims are second-class citizens.
Mikä hulabalo tulisi, jos vaikka Puola kieltäisi moskeija?
Islam doesn't believe in freedom of religion. It believes in freedom for Islam. When it's weak, it asks for tolerance. When it's strong, it ends it. Maybe we live in a world today where saying so is politically incorrect, but to do so is ignoring almost the entirety of Islamic doctrine and its own history. That's why I don't buy into this notion that all religions automatically deserve equal footing in a liberal democracy. I'm genuinely tired of pretending this is the case. I was born in a state where there was no such freedom for religions outside of Islam, and trust me, that is what the endgame always looks like when Islam takes over. Freedom of religion was meant to protect belief from power, not to hand power to belief systems that crush dissent once they have it. There's a line between practicing your faith and trying to reshape society in its image. And that brings us to the part that really puts Mehdi Hasan's words into perspective. So Mehdi declares that Muslims are as American as anybody else. But becoming an American is more than a feeling or a document. It's a pledge. Every naturalized citizen takes the oath of allegiance, swearing loyalty to the United States, its constitution, and, if called upon, to defend it. The oath includes the promise to bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by law. Now, there are exemptions to this. People can request to omit that clause if they have religious or deeply held moral objections to bearing arms or performing military service. But according to posts circulating online, good old Mehdi may just have taken advantage of that exemption when he became a US citizen. Not surprising, is it? If your faith instructs you to refuse a civic duty that every other citizen swears to uphold, I think it is then fair to ask where your ultimate loyalty lies. The oath is more than paperwork. It's a moral contract, a declaration that you belong fully to the country you've chosen. When you edit that promise, even legally, you're admitting that something else comes first. In Mehdi's case, that something else has made itself known time and again. In resurfaced clips, he's described non-believers as animals, cattle, and people who live their lives like beasts. More recently, he drew outrage after posting a tweet so grotesque he had to delete it hours later. It doesn't matter if it was meant as a joke. Mocking the deaths of fellow Americans is probably about as un-American as it gets. See, you can't demand freedom under a flag you won't fully swear to defend. That contradiction between the rights Mehdi enjoys and the values he undermines says more about this we're as American as anybody else act than any of his tweets ever could. At its core, this is about an ideology that refuses to coexist on equal terms. America's founders believed in one law for all, a secular covenant that placed conscience above creed. Mahdi's worldview, like so many Islamist ones, believes in one law, God's for all, and those two visions can't ever truly live side by side.
Totta. Näin on. No shit. Katsotaanpa lisää, mitä meinaa islamilainen kolonialismi ja tällainen historian muuttelu, että ovat kuulemma aina olleet kaikkialle, omistaneet kaikkea, rakentaneet kaiken.
Question. There are 57 Muslim countries on this planet. 22 of them are Arab, and now they're claiming to also be indigenous to the land of Israel. Here's the thing. You can't claim to be Arab and Muslim, which the Palestinians proudly do, while also claiming to be indigenous to the land your empire conquered. These colors on their flag represent the Islamic caliphates, which conquered half the civilized world at the time. Arabs and Muslims are the occupying and dominant force across the Middle East and North Africa. This is why 2 billion people in the world are Muslim. Imagine a person living in America proudly claiming to be a British Christian while also claiming to be Cherokee. It's insane. Being indigenous means having a distinct language, culture, and connection to the land that predates colonization. But the Palestinian collective boasts about being Arab and Muslim, clinging to the identity of the conquerors, not the conquered. There is nothing distinct about their culture, language, or religion. In fact, it's that of the imperialists. Yet they feed on Western ignorance, on people who know nothing about the Middle East, people living in the US, Canada, France, the UK, who feel guilty about their own colonial past. I guess that's how they sell the lie that Arabs and Muslims are indigenous and are able to rebrand a Muslim conquest movement as anti-colonial liberation. See, in the Western liberals' obsessive quest for moral purity, they think they're fighting colonialism when in fact, they're supporting it. Before the Arab-Muslim conquests, Lebanon was Phoenician, Jordan was Nabatean, Syria was Aramaean and Assyrian, Egypt was Coptic, Iran was Persian, Zoroastrian.
Aito monikulttuuri kuoli. Aidot etnisyydet, aidot uskonnot, aidot kulttuurit. Kaikki on tapettu islamin mustan lipun alle.
Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria were Amazigh, and Israel was Jewish. The only reason that Arabs and Muslims exist anywhere in these lands is because their ancestors committed genocide on the indigenous people and forced Islam on them. You can hate what I'm saying because it's not popular, but you can't prove me wrong.
No lies detected. Kaikki mitä sinun pitää tietää Israel-Palestiina-konfliktissa on summattu yhteen video, katsotaan.
やっちまいましたね。Yasa Tasklist がまさか泣いた泣かしたこれにクリス・ブルックスがすぐに入ってくるお前ひどくないかとちょっと触れただけなのにこれはここはもうマーカス・マザーズだけが頼りです
Nyt tulee Iran. Iran on se no.
彼は違うんですねなんか泣いたマーカス・マザーズも泣いた見事な融合ですねこれはみんな泣いてるひどいな
Nyt tulee YK valittaa.
さすがにレフリーもこれはないんじゃないかと
Nyt YKkin itke.
どういうことだ悪いな上の勇気これが DDT のやり方か
Se on ollut. Se on ollut.
I am proud to be an Islamophobe, and I thank you for being my Islamophobic friend. You're not alone in thinking that Sharia law is a shit culture, and they mean to turn us into slaves. How on earth do they think they're superior when they come from countries? If not for oil, they would just be sand. They can take the Sharia law and shove it up their eyes. Also, leave the goats alone. It's time
Leave
to
the
remind
goats
public
alone.
who the fuck we are. I am proud to be an Islamophobe.
Leave the goats alone.
This is the guys that attacked me on the bridge. You come try to impress me. You want to impress me? You want to touch me? You want to touch me? Touch me. Touch me.
Älä huuda.
Touch me. Touch me.
Mikä nyt pois? Älä
Dare
huuda.
you to touch me. Touch me. You're not tough. You're only tough when you wear this security stuff. No, I speak English. I don't speak
Iltaa paljon.
English. What is the problem?
Me
I don't
pois.
speak. So don't touch me. Don't touch me. Do not touch me.
Mene pois.
Don't touch me. Why you touch me? Why
Why
you
you
push me?
touching me?
So this is the guy still pushing me. Why you push me? So why you push me? Why? So why you push me? Why you push me? Why do you push me? I have my problem. I had problem. So why you push me? So where I'm going? Where? Where I'm going? My car is there. Yes, my car is there. I'm going.
Mitä nyt lähtee pois?
My car is inside here. I'm going. Yes. My car is there. So why you push me? My car is inside here.
Palestiina huivia
my
päällä.
car. So stop touching me.
Tietenkin.
So stop touching me.
Joo. Tää on Suomen oma maahas. Oisko mitä?
Stop touching me.
Lopeta riehuminen.
Yeah, but stop touching me. You have no right to touch me. Stop touching me. This is the guys here that are harassing me last time. This my car is here. My car is in the parking. So leave me alone. You have no right to touch me. So leave me alone. Leave me alone. Leave me alone, sir. Leave me alone. I'm going. Leave me alone.
No niin, sinne niin, mene sinne parkkiin.
I'm going, yes, to parking.
No niin, hei hei.
Leave me alone.
Mene sinne. Mene sinne ja lopeta. Yllättävän paljon piti hermota äijällä, että joku muu olisi voinut piestä tuon. Katsotaanpa minkälainen apartheid Israel on muuten. Kattokaa kuin paha apartheid Israel on. Paha apartheid. Kiero Stalin on taas vauhdissa. Herra Kiero Stalin on luvannut 10 miljoonaa puntaa muslimiyhteisöille taistelemaan antimuslimivihaa vastaan.
That was a horrific attack that will have impacted every single member of the community.
Kiero Stalin.
To some of the family members and getting a sense firsthand of the personal impact. I'm really
10 miljoonaa euroa. Jälleen kerran. Ihan 10 million pounds.
On top of the support we've already put in. I'm pleased to say that. I'm sad to say it as well in a sense. Because I wish we didn't need to
Good
put
deal.
In security. We shouldn't need
Se oli
to have
tonniset.
security in places of worship.
Tämä näyttää just siltä, että sä haluat antaa näille ihmisille 10 miljoonaa puntaa. Tämä näyttää just niin helvetin kannattavat tämmöiset säkkikultistit. Everybody needs this. Sä tarvit lisää tätä sun maahan. Siinä on muuten niiden sisäministeri. Allahu Akbar! Allah!
On me.
Takana kun on Al-Qaida-symbolit. Allah!
On the Home Secretary to do everything we can to tackle hate crime. I'm so sorry.
Buga. No niin, sit välillä jotain hauskaa. Kuinka kehtaat tulitauko? How dare you? How dare you tulitauko?
Land! I see land!
Where? On TikTok?
Greta!
Oh, land! Over there! Gaza!
Gaza!
We have come to save you! Stop the war! Stop
Amazing news! They stopped the war!
What? They signed a ceasefire after we demanded a ceasefire?
Yeah.
How dare they?
Yes! I mean, I put my whole life on hold for this struggle. Everything. My career, my relationship, my rooftop Pilates.
But I thought stopping the war is like a good thing.
Hyvä toi Greta ja hemmetin vihainen.
We all know war is worse than gluten.
But what am I supposed to do with the boat now? Start fishing?
Oh, right. Okay, I know. We can have more oppressed people in the world. Like, what about the genocide of Uyghurs in China?
Genocide made in China? Sounds fake.
And also, can you really see
Sounds
this
fake.
becoming the next kafia? Get real, bro.
Sorry, I wasn't thinking. Probably the shrooms.
Trouble in
I know. They're slaughtering Christians in Nigeria.
Jews are slaughtering Christians in Nigeria? Nigeria will be free from the jungle to the tree!
From the jungle to the tree.
Wait, apparently it's Muslims that are doing the killing. Yeah, Jews had nothing to do with it.
So where is the fun? It's not juicy. It's not juicy.
I mean,
Juicy.
we can always go back to fight global warming.
Global warming? What are we, 12?
Wait, they're killing Palestinians in Gaza again.
Death to the IDF! Death to the IDF!
Wait, it's not the IDF. No, it's Hamas militants killing other Palestinians.
How dare you call them militants? They are freedom fighters.
So, like, who are they killing?
Other freedom fighters.
It's a mutual, non-accountable freedom conflict. Can't you handle a little moral complexity?
Okay, now the Gazans are eating a whale.
What? A whale?
No, it's probably the shrooms.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably the shrooms, buddy. Siinä on tuleva New Yorkin pormestari ja siinä on turkkilainen striimaaja, joka sanoi, että 9/11 oli hyvä juttu. USA ansaitsi 9/11 pormestari oikeassa kaupungissa. Kauan me ollaan oltu tänään nyt striimissä. Hasan Biker ajai sähköshokki mies. Hasan. Miten kehtaat Hasan? Katsotaanpas. Onko Hasan kommunisti? Eikö tää Mambeli? Hasan nyt on kommunisti, mutta onko hän kommari vai ei? Who knows?
You've never accomplished anything. There's no reason to believe you have any merit or qualification for 8.5 million lives. You don't know how to run a government. You don't know how to handle an emergency. And you've literally never proposed a bill on anything that you're now talking about in your campaign.
Always a pleasure to hear Andrew Cuomo create his own facts at every debate stage.
Yeah.
We just had a former governor say in his own words that the city has been getting screwed by the state. Who was leading the state? It was you!
Governor Hochul.
You were leading the state for
Governor
10 years,
Hochul.
screwing the city.
No.
You cut
You
homelessness
as a
funding.
legislator.
You cut funding for the
You
MTA.
as a
You did all
legislator.
of these things, my
That's
friend.
the
That's
past
you.
4 years. It's the past 4 years.
I heard the both of them again fighting like kids in the schoolyard. Joran, your resume could fit on a cocktail napkin. And Andrew, your failures could fill a public school library in New York City.
You have never had a job.
Mr. Cuomo, in 20...
Nyt oli Irlannissa ollut taas mielenosoitus näitä hotelleja vastaan, joissa pidetään aiheettomia muslimimiehiä, kun oli jälleen raiskannut jonkun pikkutytön siellä.
Outside the City West Hotel in Dublin, where they've just issued a Section 8 order under Public Order Act. We have patriots, Irish patriots behind us with the Irish flag, as the police is going to keep moving them on.
No oli 10-vuotiaan tytön.
They're drinking alcohol, they're smoking drugs in the village, in the little square facing the Jacobs pub. This is what we're faced with every day. Drunk paraphernalia on the streets. This is not exaggeration. I have no need to be out here. I have a young child at home. None of these mothers or parents are here. This is our reality. This is our lives now. And now a young girl, 10 years old, allegedly, according to the media, 10 years old, sexually assaulted on these grounds. We've been saying this. There's been people protesting about this for a long time. We've been here consistently. We've begged our government, we've begged our TDs, we've appealed to Jim O'Callaghan directly because we could see this was going to happen. You can see when the young girls are walking through the village, the guys from this centre, ogling the girls walking by.
There's a gymnasium here, isn't there? There's a public gym.
Gymnasium right here, and there's young girls going in and out of the gym here also.
Yeah, you see them all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. And what could go wrong possibly? A recipe for disaster.
It's all, our worst nightmares are already happening.
Yeah. And
Ireland is angry, and with good reason. Over the past week, protests erupted outside a migrant hotel near Dublin after reports of a sexual assault involving a young girl, a 10-year-old little girl. The Irish people are fed up, and they are rightly so. They are tired, and finally, they have taken to the streets to protest this evil. For the Irish, this incident was more than another grave case. It was more about a system that is completely broken, a system that is completely rigged against the natives of the land, against them, the Irish, a system that prioritizes political optics.
Shows up and she's being raped, allegedly by a migrant staying at a government migrant hotel in Dublin, Ireland. Some island are fully in.
Sleeping rough in Dublin.
Tämä on hälytöntä. Kaikki Euroopan maat on ihan yhtä sekaisin. Käykää seuraavassa Body Speaks on aika kova mimmi. Hyviä aiheita maiton kanavan tuohon noin.
Iraqis, Lebanese, Syrian, Jordanian, Egyptian, these are fake Arabs. None of those are real Arabs. They were Arabized, but not Arabs. Sudan, Arabized, not Arabs. And
don't claim that shit.
It breaks my heart when some Sudanese call themselves Arabs because I'm like, bro, why?
It's identity crisis. Somalis do this thing too. It's an identity crisis. We are black as the night sky. We have curly hair. Now, do we look like a Nigerian? No, but we're still Africans. And the thing is, Arabs in the Islamic world, Nigerians and West Africans are treated like shit. Somalis and like Sudanese, we're seen as tolerable, but
tolerable. That's disgusting. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Assalamu alaikum, Habib Albi.
You're who?
أنا يهودي. أيوة. وأنت Muslim?
I'm not Arab, but I'm Muslim, yes.
MashaAllah. From where?
Oh, you're American?
Yeah.
Oh, wait. How the fuck are you on the server?
I'm American Israeli. I'm both. I hold both nationalities.
Okay. This is a clusterfuck because you look Indian, you speak Arabic, and you have a Jewish.
I don't look Indian. I'm Iraqi. This is what a Babylonian Jew looks like. Welcome. Now you've gotten educated.
Are you streaming right now?
No. I am recording, but it's not live anywhere.
I'm not gonna say nothing crazy. Here's the thing, man. Like, I think a lot of the hate from Muslims is not for Muslim or Islam itself. I think it's for Arabs, bro, because Arabs are kind of extreme. If you look at Al Qaeda, Daesh, and a lot of these extremist groups, you're not finding Asians or Indians.
Daesh on sama kuin
Africans,
ISIS.
you're finding majority Arabs.
But then how do you explain the hate from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia?
Good question. Good question.
I think it's an interpretation of an Islam kind of thing. What I will say is, I'm assuming you come of African heritage, no?
Of course.
So African Muslims, I never have, for the most part, I don't have issues with African Muslims. Like North African Muslims is different. The ones who have been Arabized.
Those are Arabs. Those aren't Africans.
They're not real
say in a
Arabs, though.
heartbeat.
They're not real Arabs. They're fake Arabs.
But they ain't Africans, bro. They'll say in a heartbeat they're not Africans.
You're right.
so
You're right.
they'll
And they won't associate with somebody who looks like you. Like they'll be like,
No,
oh no,
I'm
he's an abid. He's like they're not gonna
Yeah,
associate.
I'm Abid, but they claim to follow the Quran, bro. It's crazy.
But you're exposing everything that I talk about on a daily basis.
But it's not Islam though. It's like it's
Muslimit ovat rasisteja toisilleen.
all come from the same area. My problem with the Israelis.
Look what I have right here. Right next to my Torah, I have the Quran.
Okay.
I've read it twice. I have a lot of respect for Islam. I don't have a problem with Islam. I have a problem with.
So you're educated.
I have a problem with people who interpret Islam in a certain specific way.
Here's my problem, right?
Tell me.
So, obviously, the Torah was first Moses and Aaron, and I'm trying to think. It's mostly Moses, Dawood. Those are like the typical people in the Torah, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my problem with Israel is, because I don't want to say things I don't know. I just know that back in the day when the Crusades were happening and Christians from Europe were coming and killing fellow Christians of different denominations, Muslims and Jews alike, Muslims were actually like the ones defending Jews. And then once Muslims were controlling Jerusalem, they were pretty fair to Jews. They weren't really oppressing them like that.
That's the Muslim narrative. That's the Muslim narrative, and it's not true. There were periods of times where Muslims treated Jews well, but just like any other group of people, we all lived under the sword and under the boot of Islam. Do you know what the Cave of the Patriarchs is? Have you ever heard of this Cave of the Patriarchs?
Tell me. You probably know more than I do, so I'm not going to speak on what I don't know.
There's an ancient city in Judea called Hebron. Now it's in what they call occupied Palestine. Hebron, maybe you've heard of this city before from the Bible?
I've heard of it.
So it's the Cave of the Patriarchs where Abraham is buried, Isaac is buried, the foremothers and the forefathers of all three Abrahamic religions are buried. When the Mamluks conquered Israel, okay, this is one of the many caliphates of Islam, they barred Jews from being able to pray inside of literally one of the most holy sites to them, where all of their forefathers, I'm just to picture this for you, Arabs from Arabia, the Mamluks, who were Islamizing the region and conquering North Africa and the Middle East. They came in and told us Jews, we can't pray in this space that we were praying in for so long, for 700 years. That wasn't relinquished, not after the Mamluks. Every single Islamic caliphate that came after, including the Ottomans, kept us from being able to pray at one of our most holy sites until we reconquered the land in 1967, which Arabs or Muslims, they will call it occupation, genocide, ethnic cleansing. That's the injustice that Muslims do to us. Sure.
I'm going to respond to that. So in the Quran, you're not, it says when you're dealing with, when it talks about the polytheists, they're talking about, I'm not an ISIS member, but like if you think like the Yazidis, or if you think of like different tribes in Africa who I don't know what they worship, but when they're talking about the people of the book, they're talking about the Sabians, the Jews, the Christians,
correct,
and of those who follow the faith of the people of the book. So you're not supposed to Islamically, you're not supposed to bar people from their faith as long as they're the people of the book. So you can't like, you're a Jewish person, and I'm assuming you go to a synagogue. Now, I don't really know a lot about Judaism, so I don't want to talk like I know. But
everything in your Quran is pretty much Judaism. Islam is an inherently Zionistic religion.
Well, the Torah is first, so
correct. So if you believe in Bnei Israel, if you believe that Bnei Israel are the descendants of Yaqub, then you're a Zionist. There's no other way to break it to you.
Now, correct me, because again, I'm coming with respect, so I'm not coming like an Arab that's just gonna say "fuck you" and start talking about things.
And I appreciate that very much, brother. I really do.
So, didn't Moses and Aaron leave the children of Israel for 30 days on the mount
and
with
then
the cow?
And what happened after?
They started worshiping it, right?
And then what happened after?
I'm trying to think. Okay,
they repented and they were allowed into Israel, into the Holy Land. Who were David and Solomon, Dawood, Suleiman? Who were they?
2 prophets.
And what was their religion?
They were, I believe, they're Jewish.
Okay, so and Jesus, Isa, what was he?
He's Jewish. He's
Born in Judea, in the Roman-occupied Judea. So even Muslims always like to do this thing about what happened with Al-Baqarah, with Surah Al-Baqarah, where we pray to the golden calf. We all acknowledge it. Everybody knows it's part of the story of Passover. We have a holiday all about it. But what happened? We repented. We made a covenant with God, and God allowed us into Israel. And then we went, and then we entered the Holy Land, and we established our kingdom. That's why we had the kingdom of Judea, the kingdom of Samaria, the kingdom of Israel. David and Solomon built a temple. That's where you guys get the name Al-Quds from. Jerusalem is literally from the name Beit el-Maqdis, Beit HaMikdash in Hebrew. Your entire religion, and then this isn't me talking bad about Islam, but your entire religion is based on Judaism. I've read the Quran twice. There's minimal parts about Muhammad. Most of the life of Muhammad alayhi wasallam comes from the hadith and others. But the Quran is almost all of it is the Torah, almost the whole thing. So
same could be said for the Bible, to be honest.
For the New Testament.
The Old Testament is Mosaic law with Moses and Yusuf. Sorry, I'm talking like you're white. So I'm gonna say the Arabic.
The
like
Torah,
Yusuf,
the Tanakh, the Jews use. We stopped before Jesus. We pretty much stopped after King Solomon. That's the end of our book. Everything in the Quran is pretty much just a repetition of the Torah. And I appreciate that about the Quran, by the way. I like that about the Quran, that you guys are an inherently Zionistic religion. It's good.
So let's speak on it. So I get the idea.
And I want to say I really appreciate you, man, for being with open mind, and it's
really talking to an African, so I'm not an Arab.
God bless you, my bro.
Arabism and all that, like.
Kiva nähdä välillä.
Do Jews memorize the Torah?
Ei ole mikään maailman tyhmin kaveri, mutta johtuu varmaan siitä, että on kasvanut länsimaissa. Kerro, rupe ole 10, mä oon luvannut tehdä jotain muutakin vielä tänään. Mä ajattelin ihan nopeasti tässä lopussa vielä tämmönen uutisia Saudi-Arabiasta. He kieltävät islamilaisen kafala-järjestelmän, eli nimenomaan tällaisen oman talousjärjestelmän, missä jäädään velkaa tai orjaksi tai vaihdetaan tavaroita ja ynnä muuta. Katsotaanpa.
Our next story is from Saudi Arabia. The kingdom has officially ended the kafala system. It was a sponsorship model, a framework that was introduced in the 1950s for migrant workers. It allowed employers to seize passports and restrict the movement of workers. Critics called it modern-day slavery. Saudi Arabia decided to abolish it in June this year. It's one of the biggest changes to Saudi labor laws in decades.
Vasta tänä vuonna lopettivat orjuuden. Vasta tänä vuonna lopettivat orjuuden.
The end of the kafala system will impact over 13 million foreign workers in Saudi Arabia. This includes more than 2.5 million Indians living and working in the country. For many, it could reshape what life and work in the region looks like. Here's our report.
For decades, millions of migrant workers in Saudi Arabia lived under a system that defined every part of their working life. It was called the kafala system. In Arabic, kafala means sponsorship. It was a system that tied every foreign worker to a local employer. That employer, called the kafil, held control over the worker's visa, job, and residence. Workers could not change jobs. They could not leave the country as their passports were confiscated, and they could not renew their permits without the sponsor's approval. It shaped the lives of millions. From construction sites to homes and hospitals, the kafala system defined how migrant labor worked in Saudi Arabia. The system was introduced in the 1950s during the oil boom that transformed the West Asian region. It was designed to regulate the influx of foreign labor that powered the region's rapid growth. Over time, the model spread across West Asia. Each country implemented its own version. But in every case, it gave employers significant control over foreign workers. In Saudi Arabia, this control extended to millions. The country has around 13.4 million migrant workers. They make up about 42% of its population. Most of them come from South and Southeast Asian countries. So the reform, unveiled in June this year, officially ends the decades-old system. It replaces the system with a contract-based framework. Workers can now switch jobs after completing a contract or by giving proper notice. They can travel abroad without needing an exit visa or their employer's approval in most cases. And they can file complaints if...
Jos on työnantaja sitä mieltä, että et sä lähde kotiin enää, sä oot täällä loppuiässä mun orjaa, niin sit sä oot. Se ei päästä sua menemään. Sit sä et saa poistumisviisumia, sit sä jäät sinne.
Wages are delayed or rights are violated. It comes as part of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 plan. The plan is a roadmap to diversify the economy and attract global investment. Neighboring Qatar had overhauled its labor rules before hosting the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Observers say Saudi Arabia's move follows that regional momentum for reform. For Indian workers, this could be a turning point. Reportedly, more than 2.5 million Indians live and work in the country. It is one of the largest expatriate communities in the kingdom. Saudi Arabia also hosts migrant labor from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Indonesia, among others. Most are employed in construction, healthcare, domestic work, retail, and services. Easier job transfers and fewer travel restrictions could allow workers to seek better pay and safer working conditions. But experts say implementation will be key to the reform's success. Still, for many, the change is being seen as historic, offering new independence and mobility. And for Saudi Arabia, it marks a step towards a more open and modern labor market.
Want the facts?
The latest development?
Semmonen. Semmonen juttu tällä kertaa. Kello on 10, mä oon luvannut tänään tehdä jotain muutakin. Pidettiin tämmönen lyhyt, kiva striimi, katsottiin pari dokkaria yhdessä ja ei tos varmaan muuta, laita videolle tykkäys, jos et ole vielä laittanut jo tilausta päälle ja kiitoksia Keijolle täällä ja Maarit Elisa ja Vesako oli täällä, kuka oli? Tippiä, en ole muuta, kiitoksia tosi paljon. Käykää katsomassa kahvi.jasa.fi, voi sponssata kahvikupin, mutta eipä tässä ole varmaan mitään muuta. Toivottavasti nautit näistä pienistä videoista. Ensi viikolla katsotaan taas ihan normaalia uutisaiheita ja uutisartikkeleita. Ei tässä varmaan mitään muuta. Alkaa kilttiä toisillenne, nähkää kiveä unia ja varokaa arabiorjuutta ja et joudu orjatyövoimaksi arabiherralle jonnekin Saudi-Arabiaan. Hyvää yötä.